In the dust beneath ancient cities, where temples once rose like stairways to the sky, a forgotten world whispered the origin of everything we call civilization. Welcome to Uncover Time, where the past awakens and the silent stones of Samaria speak again of the first cities, the first kings, the first poems, and the buried roots of the world we know. Written history begins not with Greece, but in the Near East, a vast region stretching from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan, where over 6,000 years ago, humans first mastered writing, agriculture, trade, architecture, and law. Here in the sun-baked lands of Mesopotamia and beyond, people invented the alphabet and the calendar, medicine and the wheel, sculpted architecture, played board games, drank beer, raised laws, and charted the stars. Long before Greece inherited the torch of culture, it was the Near East through Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Elam that lit the flame, building everything from libraries and contracts to trade networks, ziggurats, and the earliest cities of stone. Let us begin in Elam, the highlands east of the Tigris River, where the ancient city of Susa stood as a sentinel of time, protected by marshes, backed by mountains, and home to one of the oldest known civilizations. A generation ago, French archaeologists discovered in Susa human remains over 20,000 years old, along with painted vases, copper tools, mirrors, jewelry, and early forms of writing that reached as far as India and Egypt in trade. Here appeared the world's first potter's wheel, and more astonishingly, the wagon wheel. Centuries before either was found in Babylon or Egypt, signaling a leap forward in human movement, industry, and imagination. Susa rose, fell, and rose again for 6,000 years. Standing through the empires of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and still shining under the name Shushan as late as the 14th century of our era. When Ashurbanipal of Assyria captured Susa in 646 BC, he took gold, silver, jewels, garments, royal thrones, perfumes, chariots, and cosmetics, all signs of a culture that knew refinement and innovation before being dragged into the fire of war. Now we turn west to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, where the buried cities of Sumer rise again through their ruins. Eridu, Uruk, Larsa, Lagash, Nippur, and Nizan, each once alive with markets, scribes, and kings. To the north, Lachish and Agada, cities of Semitic peoples who would one day clash with the non-Semitic Sumerians in a long struggle for power, giving rise to one of the first recorded civilizations in all of human history. The Sumerians are a mystery, their race unknown, their origins debated, perhaps from Armenia, the Caucasus, or even distant Mongolia. They came down the rivers, building cities and customs that would echo across millennia. Short and stocky, with high noses and draped woolen robes, they wore sandals and rings. Their women adorned in necklaces and bracelets, their servants bare to the waist, their homes pulsing with a quiet sophistication far older than Rome or Athens. Around 2300 BC, when their civilization was already old, Sumerian storytellers wrote of a great flood that drowned a sinful world, a story that flowed into Babylonian and Hebrew tradition and became part of global mythology. In 1929, archaeologist Leonard Woolley uncovered an 8-foot layer of silt beneath the ruins of Ur, a silent witness to a massive flood that separated two worlds, one buried in mud, the other reborn in legend. Their priest historians compiled king lists that reached back over 400,000 years and told tales of Gilgamesh and Tammuz, figures who lived on in poems, legends, and memory, even as cities fell and were forgotten. By 1850, Sumer was all but unknown, until archaeologists uncovered vocabularies and tablets, ruins of temples and streets, and slowly pieced together a lost chapter of human history. From Kish to Ur, from Lagash to Nippur, kings rose and fell, and among them was Urakagina of Lagash, a reformer who dared to limit taxes, reduce corruption, and declare, "I gave liberty to my people, but peace is fragile, and power forgets reform." For Lugalza-Gisi marched on Lagash, burned its temples, shattered its statues, and led even the carved images of its past away in chains, while a poet mourned the raped city in the oldest surviving lament. From the ashes of Lagash rose a Semitic warlord named Sargon of Akkad, a man of no royal birth, said to be born of a temple woman and set adrift in a reed basket, rescued like a foundling from the river and destined to rule an empire. Sargon began as a cupbearer, then seized power in Agada, calling himself King of Universal Dominion, forging the world's first multi-city empire, marching east and west, reaching Elam and the Mediterranean, and washing his weapons in the Persian Gulf. He ruled for 55 years, surrounded by legend, conquest, and revolt, and left behind a world forever changed. For with him began the idea of empire, where cities became provinces and kings claimed the right to rule vast lands. His grandson, Naram-Sin, continued this legacy, and though only fragments remain, his victory stele, a carved stone monument, shows him stepping over the bodies of his enemies with bowed head and arrow drawn, high in the Zagros Mountains. And then, as so often in history, the empire faded, but the cities endured. And by the 26th century BC, Lagash flourished again under another wise ruler, Gudea, a calm and literate leader of peace and reform. Statues show Gudea seated in prayer, a strong but thoughtful face, clothed in a robe carved with inscriptions. And his legacy was not war, but the building of schools, shrines, aqueducts, and fair policies that tempered power with care. One inscription from Gudea's reign says, "During 7 years, the maidservant was equal to her mistress. The slave walked beside his master. And in my town, the weak rested by the strong, a golden moment in a hard world." Meanwhile, the great city of Ur prospered, tracing its origins to 3500 BC, and under the kings Ur-Anger and Dungi, it became rich and orderly, with canals, law codes, wide trade, and early forms of written justice. Trade poured through the Euphrates, and Ur, like Athens centuries later, rose with beauty and ambition, its ruler constructing great civic buildings and organizing society with laws that claim to bring righteousness to the land. But the world changes, and peace never lasts. The warlike Elamites from the east and the Amorites from the west came crashing into Ur, captured its king, and looted its treasures in a storm of fire and conquest. The poets of Ur mourned their city in first-person laments, describing their suffering with raw emotion. How statues were stolen, robes torn, and homes desecrated, while families fled and everything sacred seemed lost. For 2 centuries, Elam and Amor ruled the plains of Sumer, until a new power rose from the north, Hammurabi, king of Babylon, who recaptured the lost cities, defeated the invaders, and built a new empire with law at its core. Even as rulers changed and new powers rose, the soul of Sumer remained, in its writing, farming, mathematics, and structure, quietly passed down and adopted by every conqueror that followed. Each year, the Euphrates overflowed, bringing both danger and fertility. And the Sumerians, even by 4000 BC, had built canals to control the floods, turning wild rivers into organized fields of grain and date palms. From these fields came wheat, barley, spelt, and vegetables, plowed by oxen, planted with tube-like seed drills, and harvested with care, using sledges with flint blades to separate the straw and grain. Though tools were simple, of flint, clay, ivory, and bone. Copper and bronze appeared early in Sumer, and metalworkers began to mix and melt alloys for stronger tools and ceremonial weapons. Homes were built of sun-dried mud bricks or bundles of reeds shaped into domes or arched roofs, with thick walls and shaded courtyards, while animals walked freely around the homes and water was drawn from deep hand-dug wells. Transport flowed along canals and rivers, but in Kishé early wheeled carts and wagons were found, and business seals from Sumer show signs of contact with Egypt and India, hinting at a trade world far wider than imagined. Coins did not yet exist, but gold and silver were measured in weights or shaped into rings, used in trade alongside grain, animals, and textiles, with contracts written on clay to seal the deal for all time. Clay tablets reveal loans, rentals, interest rates, and business rules, including some interest as high as 33%, a reminder that even in this early world, financial ambition was already shaping human society, buried in tombs alongside gold and records. Sumer's documents show a layered society: elites, scribes, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers. A structured civilization where status was visible in dress, housing, and burial. In this world, slavery was common, property rights were firmly protected, and a growing middle class emerged, made of scribes, physicians, traders, and skilled workers. Forming the backbone of Sumerian urban life, medicine offered treatments for every illness, combining observation with tradition, listing symptoms, remedies, and prescriptions, though much still relied on inherited rituals and early theories of the body and mind. The calendar followed the moon 12 months named differently in each city, with a 13th month added every few years to keep the seasons aligned, helping farmers plan sowing, harvests, and festivals. Each city had its own leader, the Patesi, or city king. And as trade expanded and competition grew, powerful rulers emerged who unified multiple cities under single banners through diplomacy or force. These monarchs ruled from protected palaces with narrow entryways and armed guards, keeping security tight in a time when betrayal could come from within as easily as from outside. When war came, the king rode to battle in a chariot, leading soldiers armed with spears, bows, and axes, not in the name of ideas, but for wealth, land, and control over trade and resources. Some conquests were brutally honest, like Menishtu of Asuod, who invaded Elam for access to silver mines and highland stone to carve statues of himself that would outlive his body in reign. Victors often enslaved the defeated or executed them in the field, and some rulers went as far as offering prisoners as part of public displays of dominance or punishment. To manage these empires, rulers granted land to loyal generals and governors, who ruled locally, raised taxes, and sent grain and animals as tribute, forming the first feudal-like structure in recorded history. Government income came through taxation, paid in kind, such as grain or oil, and was stored in royal warehouses, then distributed to officials, workers, and soldiers in carefully managed rations. Justice was written into codes: marriage, contracts, inheritance, theft, and personal injury. Unlike harsher systems that came later, these early codes were often milder, allowing, for example, a husband to take another wife if wronged, rather than calling for execution or violence. The law covered all aspects of life. It ensured that debts were paid, contracts honored, families protected, and estates managed, using the written tablet as the ultimate witness in disputes. Judges sat in temple courts, often chosen from trained officials or scholars, and their rulings were based on written precedent, forming one of the earliest examples of procedural law. Many disputes were first brought to arbitrators, respected figures who tried to find a peaceful solution before the case moved to formal court. A system that echoes in modern mediation today. Every contract, trade, and legal decision was recorded on clay and preserved not just for memory, but for accountability, proving that even in the earliest cities, record-keeping meant power. Temples served not only as courts and granaries, but also as centers of training, where youth learned reading, mathematics, surveying, and how to become scribes, accountants, or advisors. Though mythology shaped how they explained the world, the social functions behind temples, storage, writing, law, education, revealed them as early civic centers, managing both thought and survival. One inscription records a king describing his reforms to protect poor farmers from corruption, reduce excessive taxes, and make sure that all citizens had access to fair process. A moment of early political ethics carved in clay. Every temple employed women in various roles, from craft and household work to administration. And families sometimes offered their daughters to serve in these institutions as a form of honor and status. Marriage was a legal institution backed by written agreements. Women retained their dowries, could manage property jointly or independently, and had legal say in household, business, and inheritance matters. In the absence of a husband or adult son, women could run estates, manage trade, and defend their rights in court, and in some cases, like Queen Shabad, women rose to positions of regional power and wealth. However, Sumer was still patriarchal. A man could remarry if his wife was barren, or reduce her household standing, and in some cases, dismiss or even sell her to cover debts, though this was not common practice for elite families. Children had few legal protections and could be disowned publicly by their parents, showing that family structure, though advanced, still had sharp legal edges in times of crisis or poverty. Among the elite, women enjoyed refined luxuries. Archaeological finds include cosmetics made from crushed malachite, golden pins, tweezers, scented oils, and delicate containers carved from gold and shell. Jewelry was abundant. Rings of gold wire, necklaces with fluted lapis lazuli, and bracelets stacked on both wrists, revealing a deep sense of style, identity, and artistry even in the oldest burials. More than any artifact, it was writing that defined Sumer as early as 3600 BC. Symbols appeared on stone, then clay tablets, pressed with wedge-shaped styluses in a script now known as Cuneiform. Scribes recorded contracts, inventories, stories, taxes, legal rulings, and literature. And by 2700 BC, entire libraries had been built, including one with 30,000 tablets stored and cataloged in orderly rows, one of the earliest known poems. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells the story of friendship, loss, and the quest for meaning, preserved across centuries and influencing storytelling far beyond its time. Architecture also advanced. Early homes had red domes, but cities grew into brick houses with arched drains, courtyards, and even two-story layouts. some buildings showing true arches from as early as 3500 BC. Temples rose in layers, crowned with ziggurats, step-shaped towers wrapped in staircases, made from colored tiles and topped with chambers. Used for storage, governance, and ceremonial life at the heart of the city. Palaces were built atop artificial hills, protected with thick walls, and painted with patterns and red terracotta mosaics, designed not just for living, but for projecting stability, authority, and order. Their statues, though stiff and stylized, carried real power, like the stocky forms of Gudea, carved in a robe of cuneiform, seated with folded hands. His calm face surrounded by scrolls and measuring rods. Their goldsmiths achieved brilliance with elegant daggers, lapis-sheathed tools, and delicately worked seals no larger than a coin, each one telling a story or serving as a personal identifier in trade and law. Pottery was humble, but jewelry was masterful, and this contrast defines Sumer, practical and poetic. Simple in need, but elevated in imagination, with a civilization that balanced grain with gold, contracts with carving. As centuries passed, Sumer's innovations spread. North to Akkad and Babylon, and west toward Egypt, where archaeologists have traced Sumerian influence in tools, wheels, artistic motifs, and early urban planning. Trade moved through the Red Sea and Suez, connecting Mesopotamia to the Nile. And through this corridor, the knowledge of cuneiform, irrigation law, and civic structure crossed into one of the world's next great civilizations. Though the debate continues about who came first, the material remains. Writing stonework, technologies, suggest that Sumerian culture was the wellspring from which others would draw, shape, and reimagine civilization. And so, while the cities of Sumer fell silent, their influence flowed into Babylon, into Egypt, into the Mediterranean, into Greece, and into the ideas and systems that still shape our modern world. Thank you for watching UncoverTime. Like, share, and subscribe for more journeys through history, as we recover the buried chapters of civilization and honor the minds that built the first great human story.